Welcome back to another Third Age special. We are once again in the Babylon 5 Shadow Wars modification for Star Wars Empire at War, and once again we are going to fight side by side with the Earth Alliance. We looked at this modification a little while ago, checking out the start of the Galactic Conquest. This time around we are going to remain in skirmish mode and just take a good look at the forces that are available both to the Earth Alliance and its various adversaries across the galaxy. People seem to have been fairly interested in the first video on this little modification that we put out there, so the idea of a long-form galactic conquest is definitely still on the table, but for this festive season we thought a little bit of fireworks is the most appropriate for the year ending, and what better way of doing that than having a bunch of space battles. We are going to get right in here and just do a very basic setup against a medium AI. We are going to take out the hero units because these aren't exactly streamlined for the skirmish mode here. As you can see, the skirmish mode is still mixed in with a lot of Star Wars things. We are technically playing on the Coruscant map, but in the purpose of this mod, this is Beta Durrani, one of the older colonies that Earth Alliance has. And yeah, right away you can see we start with a bunch of free garrison units, including a Hyperion heavy cruiser, which we are going to send right into the middle there to secure some of the main resource points on this map. Of course escorted by a bunch of Star Furies, and as we are going through this battle that we are going to fight, if you've already seen it in the menu, against the Army of Light / League of Non-Aligned Worlds, we will also take a look at the kind of differences that this mod actually carries over from how the show portrays the various militaries of the different races in this world. And it looks like our Star Furies are engaging a bunch of heavy Narn fighters, which are woefully outmatched by Earthforce engineering, as it seems here. We also have a little rocket gunship in action here, and you can see on the side already big green energy flashes coming. Well, anybody who knows the League of Non-Aligned Worlds a little bit can imagine which different species this might be coming from. We are also building a bunch of defense platforms here. You can see on the side the heavy global orbital defense stations. Not quite orbital in this instance, but you will see very soon they spam a lot of heavy missiles, which is a running theme for all of Earthforce in this iteration. Our first capital ship, the Hyperion, is also engaging some enemies here, and we are sending it a little bit forward to start engaging the enemy's counterpoint to that. The Star Furies, it looks like, have easily won and are now going to form up in some defense of this entire central cluster here. The gravity well generator is still active, so it's going to be harder to get some reinforcements in here, but at the same time it also means the enemy can't jump right on top of us. Next we are going to build is going to be an Olympus-class Corvette Mk203, it looks here. This is a mechanic that is mostly important for the Galactic Conquest side of this mod, where the fleets are a bit bigger and there's a lot more technological progress going here, but even in the skirmish we're going to go through the different stages of Earth Alliance technology that we know of. Activating extra energy power to increase the fire rate of our Hyperion, you can see it melts through the Valkyrie vessel here relatively easily. Depending on what expanded canon you read, the Valkyrie have a more or less retrofitted merchant fleet or corporate security forces. Not particularly dangerous, at least not as dangerous as this defense platform was for our Olympus-class Corvette warping in there. And you can see the way the enemy faction, the Alliance of Light here, works in the skirmish mode. They are basically going through different tech levels and inviting different species into their fight. The Narn are here taking a bit of a pummeling. This is a fairly early Narn cruiser and it's getting absolutely obliterated by Earth Alliance missiles here. This for me is one of the more interesting things looking at Earth Alliance in this mod and the Babylon 5 universe in general. We just recently talked about A Voice in the Wilderness, where we see the Hyperion for the very first time in the show, and it's such a beautiful example of how Earth attains its great power status in this universe, which is basically just throwing a bunch of industrial prowess at the wall. And yeah, targeting systems, energy weapons, all these things are not particularly great, but if you have enough ordnance thrown around, that's gonna do the job, although it looked like we almost had a friendly fire incident here with big missiles of our own defense stations hitting this Olympus-class corvette, which has now been assigned into Task Group 2, which is going to be in charge of defending the central resource nodes here. And you can see, even on normal AI, this match is going to be fairly one-sided once Earth gets entrenched. Here we are building up our resource gathering ability here, and then it's mostly going to be building up the different tiers of technology in the skirmish mode here to show off what the Earth Alliance fleet has to offer. Once again, with a lot of firepower, the Hyperion goes through some Narn defense stations here, and this is really the main thing Earth Alliance has to do. We don't really have any fancy defenses or interceptors going on, so getting the enemy down before we take a lot of damage is sort of the main mode of operations here. And you see, it's as if we don't really have the specialization like on the Olympus-class corvette here, which is mainly anti-fighter equipped. Enemy fire is going to take us down fairly quickly, so this poor captain has a very unenviable job chasing down the Brakiri as they are retreating here. And there the Brakiri vessel goes, quickly blown up. This is one of the nice mechanics of Empire at War in general, this idea of creating damage models. We keep encountering Brakiri vessels, and you just saw there, it's a Brakiri space station that we are currently facing. As the enemy takes up, this space station is going to go through a number of different iterations. So far though, the only species involved in this conflict seem to be the Narn and the Brakiri. A pretty unlikely alliance, I imagine, unless the Brakiri saw some really good profiteering opportunities here. That being said, Narn defense stations have been pretty effective at harassing us on the sides here, or still are in this duel between defense satellites here, so we are going to take care of those and claim these building points, these hard points for our own. Another Hyperion class should, in short order, take these out. One of the challenges any TV show obviously faces, or faced specifically back in the 90s, is how do you showcase a full-on fleet. This mod obviously has the luxury of giving us a whole range of different spaceships, but the Hyperion that we see here in all its glory still makes up the backbone of the Earth Alliance fleet for the majority of the early tech levels before we move on to arguably the more famous Earth capital ship from the show, which is the Omega-class destroyer. The same goes, of course, for the aliens here, and we see Narn technology not particularly that much more advanced than Earth Alliance, but they do have these massive energy lances which will quickly take care of our armor if we're not careful. Back home, of course, also our space station nicely rotating. We are not going to be building Babylon 5 on this field, but definitely some major defensible positions if the enemy were to take a counter-offensive here, which I don't think in this battle is very likely to happen, but if they tried, they would have some interesting battle on their hands. Fighters for Earth Alliance, very important. Not something that we particularly often see in other species of the show. The Minbari seem to be doing it quite a lot of times, and Narn rely heavily on it, but I guess it kind of makes sense for the minor powers of the non-aligned worlds to be less invested in that, because apart from just technological differences, maintaining carrier capacities, pilots training, and just these masses of fields is probably quite costly, so not something they can easily do with smaller navies. And we have here kind of a rematch of the Earth Minbari War. This is not quite a heavy Shalin war cruiser on the Minbari side, but still an extremely dangerous foe, so we are going to send in an entire task force of Hyperions with full escorts and hope that this time around the targeting systems actually get them. And yeah, here you see in full effect the Earth Alliance way of dealing with more advanced enemy foes. Just throw as much of the ordnance at it as possibly can be done, and before long this lone Minbari vessel is taken out of the equation. We are creeping up the tech levels here, but it takes quite a lot of time, so we are slowly going to gather a nice and healthy core of the fleet of Hyperion ones here, it looks like. We have one kind of to spare up there in the special area cordoned off by Nebula, which we are going to use later on maybe to sneak behind the enemy and jump in a few extra vessels outside of the enemy's firing arcs. That is to say, though, at least on the map sizes here, it's not like you're going to see a lot of very advanced technical plays, from my part at least. I'm not that much into RTS skirmishes, but it is a very nice opportunity to toy around with some building little fleet task groups and such as we engage here. Although I have to say I much prefer an Empire at War, the campaign gameplay where there's a lot more incentive to not let your units die as quickly, utilize fleet tenders and such, which we maybe can try out in skirmishes later on, but for now let's just lay siege to the station once we have this strength amassed. And this is going to be kind of a tough challenge because Hyperions are great in the field but not particularly best at enduring a lot of pain, as we've seen before. Our early Hyperions are dying off slowly but surely. So we are going to have to use some heavier ordnance, and we see the enemy is going to do much the same. The Narn are back, but this time not in a light cruiser, but in a fairly hefty Jaquan battle cruiser, which is the kind of vessel that we see them use in the show. Unfortunately, in the show, this vessel not very often stands a big chance, but here they are a quite formidable foe when they're not faced with some of the most powerful vessels the galaxy has to offer. We just jumped in our enforced task force, and you see here the wonderful broadside of the Nova-class dreadnought, the pre-Minbari War and Minbari War era Earth Alliance vessel, very infamous for just having a big bunch of giant cannons strapped on top of it. A very, very nice vessel to have here, and as you've seen, the Narn cruiser has taken a massive pounding here. It's not going to survive for very long. We don't really have to chase it down. We are going to concentrate on building up our offensive forces here, and we are also putting in a bunch of these little rocket boats. Taktische Raketenschiffe, I believe they are called in this German version of the game. I am using the German version of the game because this is where the mod is localized to, otherwise there would be a whole lot of missing string, missing text files here in this iteration. These missile ships are great. As you can see, they just fire off massive salvos at long range. Performance-wise for the game, this isn't the greatest thing ever. It tends to make things a little bit less stable, but they can really do a lot of damage, particularly against superior enemy fighters, although this isn't a massive problem in this battle. It looks like our Star Furies have firmly established themselves as the rulers of battle space over here. And it looks like the enemy advance has somewhat died down. They have lost their spearhead with the Narn and joined Minbari task force early on, so they are now returning to a much more defensive stance, which we are going to use advantage of, reamassing our forces, collecting all of them here in one big battle group, and I think this is going to make for a good opportunity to try and make a first push against what has now become a mighty Minbari star fortress. It's no longer a Brakiri trading station, and therefore is going to be a much tougher nut to crack. Which means for us, lots and lots more missile boats, and hopefully, relatively soon, a next generation of mainline battleships. Classifications, of course, in the Babylon 5 universe are a little bit all over the place. Personally, I really enjoy the justification that was given to this in some of the Moon Goose fact books, where essentially the drift of it was Earth Alliance kept updating classifications in this rapid technological arms race as they were conquering the asteroid belt and the outer planets, and at some point they just gave up and said, you know what, this was designed as a dreadnought, it's going to stay a dreadnought, and if the next destroyer just happens to be twice the size because our tech level has gone up that much, so be it. It's not functional to keep updating this, which really leads to this complete mess of fleet designations that we see in the show. But on the other hand, it seems like just enough of a pragmatic bureaucracy that I can buy it happening in the military. Some beautiful cinematic shots here as we take apart another Narn heavy cruiser, but our fleet is really taking a pounding. As you can see, there is a lot more Minbari showing up. The Brakiri keep sending in their little triangular fighters as well, so our Nova unfortunately is getting surrounded and it looks like overwhelmed with lots of explosions going off here. You can see here, of course, or you can hear rather, the sound effects are taken from various asset collections of this mod, so it's really doing a great job of emulating the space battles, but here and there are some leftovers, like Boba Fett's concussive charges, which are being used, I believe, as sort of a stand-in for Narn energy mines, which is working out really great. Here though, to quickly get back to the actual gameplay happening on screen here, we have a much more serious situation. The Minbari have shown up, and it seems to be the religious caste which is bringing on some white stars, which are really nasty little units in this modification. They behave a little bit like very heavy fighters, but they have a mainline cannon that takes care of capital ships quite easily. So much like in the show, insanely maneuverable, hard to hit, and very, very powerful mainline weapons here. So taking care of them is a top priority. And so to reinvigorate our push on the station, which was broken in this first attempt, we send in a much heavier task force and make quite a big tactical blunder, it looks here, because yeah, we send these jump points in way too close to the enemy, and our first Nova Dreadnought got absolutely obliterated by ready heavy weapons fire from the side of the Narn. Not to worry though, we have heavier reinforcements of our own. The first Omega is on the field, and we see finally the Earth Alliance has some great big energy beams to answer the alien weaponry. What we are seeing here is, of course, a little bit the Clark regime's worst nightmare / propaganda film made manifest. All the aliens have band together to attack Beta Durrani, this major human colony. Not really something that Earth Alliance really experiences in the show. Our main station, by the way, looking quite a lot like Babylon 5 here. Maybe in early iteration this might be Babylon 1 or 2, a big rotating station now in a beautiful color scheme, almost to match the Minbari that we have over here. You will also see we have some even more modern weapons in development. We are going to push past the Clark regime era of ship designs here relatively soon and bring in some of the more alternative / speculative future designs of Earth Alliance that are only really seen and talked about here at the very end of what we ever saw on screen with the show and the subsequent movies. So the Warlock and its accompanying vessels that will finally replace the Hyperion Omega-class destroyer. It looks like we are almost exclusively fighting the Minbari Federation at this point. A lot of Drazi fighters actually in here. We haven't seen a Drazi capital ship yet, but this alliance of enemies seems to be relying quite heavily on the Minbari for their mainline warships now. Which means for us, we have to do something about the rate our ships are dying, and the first Omega is already burning up in the atmosphere down there. So what we do is bring in a Cotton Fleet Tender, which is going to repair some of our vessels very nicely. As a general nerd when it comes to space opera and spaceships, I love the concept of fleet tenders being introduced in this mod, even though, you know, doing in-battle combat repairs is maybe not exactly what you want a tender vessel to do, but if it's an excuse to showcase it in this battle, I'm going to take it very easily. And now we've reached something that I don't think Earth Alliance ever really wants to do, but then with its tech level maybe it has to resort to this. It's basically a battle for attrition here now, where we will rely on our control of the map to just bring in more reinforcements than the enemy can destroy and keep our vessels alive for as long as possible, which is in the long run going to guarantee our victory, but at the same time the losses are going to be quite horrific, so the mini PAX is going to have quite a field day trying to spin this into a positive propaganda story. But then again, maybe more casualties just mean that you can stir the tears back home a little bit more and get more sympathies for anti-alien sentiment. I'm pretty sure the Clark regime is quite experienced at that. Which is, of course, the reason why we can't really have a lot of guests like Meike in these gameplay specials yet, because All of this is of course going to be massive spoilers for her, so she's not going to be able to look at that in any capacity. But we might try to get Layla in to one of these, particularly the ex-Terran Conflict version of Babylon 5 universe, where it's really easy to do a nice little road trip and just talk about topics of the show in general. Of course, there's also the option to have co-op skirmishes in this game, so who knows, maybe we'll get at that at some point if we want to really play out the dreams of the Army of Light. Because of course we are not going to stick just to Earth Alliance in these gameplay specials. We are going to do faction showcases on both the Centauri Republic, which by extension includes the Army of Darkness essentially of this universe, and the Army of Light as well. This battle is going to close towards its end relatively soon now. We have the first Tritons on the field, which are the futuristic replacement for the Hyperion, but even they are struggling to catch the little white stars still harassing our fleet massively, which in the long run would definitely dismantle our fleet before long, but it's more than enough to take down this vessel, this massive Minbari space station, before they can really take us out. The Narn here desperately trying to destroy our tender. Even if they succeed at that now, Earth Alliance ships are just so massive, they are just so hardy that they are not going to stop us from this eventual victory. As all of this is going on, of course, Starship pirates still heroically throwing themselves at the enemy. This one really had no luck, and we see now a little bit the Brakiri perspective as the model bashes into us. And yeah, the Brakiri are soon going to face the end of their days now, because this is the moment we bring in the Warlock, this almost mythical vessel from future tales of the Babylon 5 universe, which is equipped with everything the Earth Alliance loves. Giant laser guns, massive missile pods that are firing off now, lots of little smaller cannons that rain down on the enemy, so really a full-on display of just the industrial might that this massive alliance brings to bear. That, and of course finally artificial gravity. We no longer need rotating sections, which is a really nice way of portraying the advancement of the fleet, but at the same time kind of a shame that the Earth Alliance loses its most distinguishing feature here. So I hope at least on civilian vessels that was kept for a lot longer. This is almost a Warlock Junior here, a small escort type with massive turrets on the sides. And yeah, it looks like the Narn regime has come in to save this station, but they might be coming in just a little bit too late. Their ship is quite imposing even to a Warlord, but it's not going to be able to shield the Minbari station from any further damage, even though it looks very much like it might be trying exactly that. And in these moments, yeah, the Earth Alliance remains victorious, stands victorious, not particularly something that you want to cheer for in this universe. And as we take a look at the casualty lists here, this was a fairly bloody victory, a Pyrrhic victory for the Earthforce, because 10 Hyperions on its own, a fairly substantial amount, 3 Omega-class destroyers, whereas the enemy suffered substantially, but not nearly as much. The most substantial losses there probably the 2 big Jiquan battle cruisers on the Narn side, but everything else was basically just smaller capital vessels, cheaper stuff, older stuff that they could deal with. This, of course, on its own would maybe be not quite the triumph that the mini-packs wants from us, so in duty to the Earth Alliance and Earthforce, I'm going to jump right back in, maybe into a little bit more of a heroic fight, perhaps even a more moral fight. Let's imagine in this iteration that Earth Alliance actually got its shit together and joined into what later becomes the Shadow War, because now we are going to turn against the Centauri Republic, which, I mean, we don't really have to imagine that. A little bit into the future, there's a lot of possibilities for Earthforce and the Centauri Republic to clash. It's 2 of the most warmongering powers in the galaxy, so I would imagine this is bound to happen. once again on medium difficulty, so we are going to rush out here a little bit to secure ourselves some of these resource nodes, take advantage of the fact that Hyperion can boost its engines while our Star Furies take care to secure some of these earlier asteroids, which sometimes is a little bit finicky for them to properly capture these points so that you can build on them. The Hyperion is going straight into the middle here. I think one of the quirks of this mod is that Earth Alliance still retains the Imperial naming schemes from the Star Wars universe, so our first Hyperion here is the Aggressor. But then again, these are not too far off from what we might imagine something in Earth Alliance to be. Although the actual models do have decals and stuff with names from the show on them and stuff adjacent to that, so that's really nice to see. I think we can have a little bit of luck and see the Schwarzkopf or Magdeburg in here. The bumps that you hear in the background are, by the way, asteroids hitting straight into the Hyperion cruiser here, so it is in not a great position. Energy shields are a thing in this modification, and for the purpose of this mod they weren't entirely reduced, but for Earth Alliance they are extremely weak, so imagine them more like the outermost secure layer of little blocks of reactive armor strapped to these vessels so that they have a little extra bit of protection. Our Hyperion here is going to engage in a little bit of a duel against a Vorchan class Centauri vessel, which is quite dangerous when you try and approach it from the front. You see just the amount of weapons being discharged here. They are much, much heftier than what Earth has to offer, so even with the support of a massive defense station here, our Hyperion is going to struggle quite a bit to keep up and secure this little resource outpost. We will have to see just who of these two enemies is going to be the more troublesome, the more dangerous. With the Centauri we definitely have to stay on our toes, but then again the Centauri are very much described in the show as a faction that has, as a fleet that has a lot of initial firepower, can do a lot of damage, but it needs to be very methodical in how it advances, because it's not really made for a lasting, ongoing fight. So if in the last fight we already went into a battle for attrition, this might be something that is a massive advantage to us here. That being said, we are going to try to be a little bit methodical ourselves here, so try to secure station hard points on our own, secure these little resource nodes, because even if we can't really hold them, they are going to be good distractions for the enemy to deal with. These little Centauri bows, they aren't particularly hefty, they don't really pack a big of punch, but as you saw there very briefly, they have these nasty little lasers that can shoot down our missiles, and for a faction that relies almost exclusively on massive missile barrages and brute force firepower, this might be quite dangerous. Also, Centauri fighters, famed as some of the most capable in the Babylon 5 galaxy, they will definitely wipe the floor with our Star Furies if we don't give them a little bit of an edge. Which is also going to mean that our Omega class, not Omega, the Olympus class corvettes here are going to get a time to shine. We need to keep them in the backlines. They're definitely not armored to take a pounding from any of the heavier Centauri vessels. That's what our Hyperions are for, but at long ranges against Centauri fighters, rapid firepower is definitely something that we want. Our station here is probably just rotating on the inside. This one is properly armored all around. I believe the transfer point at Io in the show has a very similar model, and it's nice to see that here. We are going to use it to call in a bunch of Hyperions and once again take up as fast as we can to get some heavier vessels. For this round I'm going to try and get to the tender as quickly as possible so that we can actually start building sustainable fleets here, because we have this poor aggressor, this poor first Hyperion that we had here, which by all accounts I would love to just jump out, but of course retreating in the skirmish version of this game is not really an option. If this was an actual battle on the campaign map, okay, then we could think about keeping this one on the back lines and having it escape with the rest of the fleet later on. Unfortunately, like many RTSs, the skirmish mode in this one kind of encourages throwing away your units at some point. Let's do a little bit of a push forward. We don't have the Thunderbolt scout version of the Star Fury yet, which does have long-range scanners in this modification, but we are just going to do it the old-fashioned way and send a bunch of little Star Furies on their own towards a location where there is an asteroid field and presumably another mine. If we can start harassing the economy positions of the enemy, then we can definitely paint some targets outside of our own resource nodes, which would be nice to do. And calling in an Hyperion here at a safe distance should put us into a perfect position to just pound this one asteroid into oblivion. We don't really see a lot of orbital or asteroid-based industry in the show. The show universe seems to be very much focused on planets being the one thing that you really want to fight over, although the commercial sector keeps talking about asteroid mines and such, so this is something that perhaps more fanworks might be so focused on highlighting a little bit of the space-based technologies and infrastructure that this universe has to offer. Definitely like some nice opportunities for settings here. In the middle, the Centauri are not quite managing a cohesive fleet position here. Maybe sending the Watcher in first would have been a smarter option to give it more protection from the backline here, although I can see why the Centauri are in disarray, because they are now fighting alongside the Drug, which means the Centauri Republic is not in the greatest of places. The Drug, of course, being the remainder of the Shadows, a lost ally that has latched onto the Centauri quite literally. And I would presume is forcing the poor Centauri here to throw themselves against these defenses in a rather reckless manner. Modifications like this, of course, are prone to being quite volatile when it comes to the balancing, so I don't want to imagine how well this mod might be suited to actual competitive engagements or not, but I've played a fair number of Empire at War modifications, and this is definitely one of the surprisingly more polished ones for being a relatively niche franchise compared to like the big names. Of course, we could invest into a lot of upgrades here now, maybe even into the super weapon, but honestly, a bunch of upgraded Hyperions and Olympus-class corvettes sound just enough, like what we want to see here. We are going to assemble a little task force here in the middle and perhaps go for a little bit of a raid towards the southern edge of the map, where the next resource node of the enemy lies, because so far going after those has worked out quite well. We are getting a little bit of outflanked here by a lone Centauri raider, which I love to imagine is something that the Centauri do in the show as well. Just these quick assaults on enemy lines, don't really engage the enemy force outright from the front, but rather, you know, stick to the rear, stick to their flanks, harass them and wear them down over time without risking a proper frontline engagement outright. Of course, this is exactly what the Earth Alliance here wants to provoke, so we are going to go on the proactive side here and start pushing into enemy territory, find out where exactly the enemy station is located. Let's just pretend it's not an RTS map and it doesn't have to be completely symmetrical, but you know, of course it's going to be. But we are going to get our bearings here a little bit on the enemy territory and tear through anything that is in our way. And you can see 3 of these Hyperions. They might be outdated, they might be outmatched against the Narn or the heavier vessels of the Centauri on their own, but en masse they can definitely do some damage. It looks like our upper task force number 3 here has engaged with the main station of the enemy. We are going to push the engines on this Hyperion to their max, but with the pathfinding of this game it might be a little bit difficult to get it out of there alive, because it might just turn right into the firing arcs of the station. We'll have to see. The main task force though seems to be pushing quite successfully forward, and if technology keeps up with this, then we can soon start upgrading it with a bunch of more specialized vessels, heavy firepower from the Nova, and some rocket boats to properly push this in. For the sake of brevity, we are going to push this battle along a little bit quicker, and it's going to cost the Hyperion its life, but on the other hand we have taken another resource node. We are very much fighting an indirect conflict here with attacking each other's resource stations without the main fleets properly engaging, taking a note out of the handbook of the Shadows and Warlords here to try and avoid the main confrontation for as long as possible. In response, let's just reinforce our main station, reinforce a bunch of these resource nodes so that we have at least something there to distract the enemy, and now we are in a position where we can finally start building tenders and some heavier capital ships that will hopefully warrant just a more complex fleet composition here, where we actually try to keep them alive and perhaps launch an assault on the main station that is not going to be quite as devastating as what we faced against the League of Non-Aligned Worlds a few minutes ago. This composition seems to be the preferred one for the Centauri right now, a small Drak vessel and a small Centauri vessel. As long as it stays that way, it's going to be manageable. If they start building up a more combined force of these, the Drak soaking up damage and the Centauri doing it, then that might become a big problem. And that sound, it's absolutely beautiful. These little chimes indicating that yes, we are actually repairing some of our vessels, so now we can move forward properly. Starting to amass bigger forces before attacking us. Luckily, our Nova can shoot some big lasers even while it's running away, so this is buying us a little bit of time, although it looks like there is some heroics going on from this single Hyperion there holding off the enemy as the rest of the fleet hastily rearranges itself. Here up in the north is a lone Watchers attacking the asteroid station. We don't really have anything that will be able to destroy the Watcher there, but if we start an assault on the main fleet of the Centauri and on their main station, that might just be enough to draw the enemy away. The AI in this game was never really outstanding, let alone in modification versions where it's not really sure how to model some of these vessels, their capabilities and such, but one of the things that's always very satisfying is that it does react to things that are happening on the battlefield in a way that seems sometimes fairly immersive, like running back to the station when it's actually under attack. We are once again going to put one of these Hyperions into a rear guard, making sure that our tender stays alive, and the heavy ships take the front to try and go at this Centauri space station, which is beautifully modeled after the one at Ragesh 3. Even if it's getting upgraded, it's just getting more armored up, and remains distinctly Centauri from what we see. Once again a pairing of Drak and a Watcher class Centauri vessel, but as our fleet grows, these attacks are growing more and more futile. It's going to take a lot more to take us out more, especially going side by side with a Nova class. It might be an old ship, but it's definitely packing a hefty punch, so that's not going to be a good idea. We have a very special mega upgraded Olympus class corvette, which is kind of funny because it just means we have strapped even more weapons and even more armor onto what's basically a metal box in space, so it's not exactly going to be an amazing vessel no matter what you do, but it is nice to see that in direct comparison you see down there, it looks significantly more armored up. It's visually distinct from the less upgraded versions. Isn't it a beautiful sight, these massive blocks of Earthforce technology fighting against the ornate and beautifully designed Centauri designs? We don't need any of that fancy stuff, we don't need the fancy uniforms or peacock hair, we just need raw firepower, and as we unleash that, I think this is going to be a much, much faster and more successful assault on the main station here. We don't really stand to lose nearly as much with the support of our tenders. Of course, we are exposing our rear here a little bit, so the enemy is trying to take advantage of that, pulling its forces back to maybe go after some of our tenders, and the response of that is another rear attack on our end. So we are just going to jump in extra forces back there and slowly clean up the mess that the Centauri have created, so that our main force attacking the station can do so in peace. And there goes the Drak. I want to say Drak Mothership, but it isn't really. There is a Drak Mothership in this mod, and it is significantly bigger and significantly more dangerous. It's the kind of thing that, you know, you would need a bunch of white stars to actually effectively engage, otherwise that would be a massive problem. Back here, our armored up Olympus-class corvette, this veteran of the Drazi and not the Drazi War, the Dilga War, of course. Probably one of the oldest vessels still serving in the fleet. Another instance where Earth Alliance, of course, builds its strength up by numbers by just keeping everything around it possibly can and sending it into battle. Which, you know, we can't knock it because so far it seems to be working great. So we are just going to invest into some high-end escorts and some good old-fashioned Omega-class capital ships here. The Centauri are pushing for a defensive line here. It looks we see a bunch of Centauri warships taking position in between our fleet and the main station as if to shield it. But of course that is exactly the position that the Centauri never want to find themselves in a one-on-one head-to-head fleet fight. They are just not made for that. Their vessels are a little bit more flimsy, a lot of forward firepower, but even on the receiving end with this much standing against them, they don't really have a chance to outmatch the sheer numbers that we have on them now. If we think for the future, of course, of galactic conquest campaigns, this kind of gives us an inkling on how we might want to proceed on this with Earthforces, where Earthforce is going to have a much easier time holding on to its territory once it has amassed a big fleet, and pushing into the Centauri territory might not be a massive problem as long as we can amass a big enough fleet, but Centauri raiding parties that just go after an individual station of ours, they might be a really significant threat. Luckily this is not something that we have to worry about here, though. We just push in the last of our escorts, and even though more Omega-class destroyers are building and ours are getting slightly damaged, I think this is a done deal for the Centauri. At this point we see the massive energy lances of the Omega here firing, even if it's completely engulfed in flames. This mod is really taking the explosion sprites that are already in the base game and just putting them all over everything, and it creates this wonderful, very carnal effect for everything, where we are emulating a little bit just how bloodied and glowing and destructed Earthforce vessels can become in the show. But even though we lost some of the Omegas here right at the very end, this is much more the kind of tally that I'd like to see. A bunch of old Hyperions, sure, a single Omega class, that's fine, against an entire fleet of warship destroyers and a bunch of Drag vessels. That's something that we can live with. Unfortunately, yeah, we can see our Star Fury stand no chance against the Centauri sentries, so when it comes to the fighter fight, we have not much chance here. For now though, this is a good enough tally for me to end it on. The propaganda department will definitely have a field day with this, so we are going to return to the main battle here, and this is definitely not the last time that we are checking out Babylon 5 Shadow Wars, but for now this puts our skirmishes at an end. This also concludes our little Earthforce at War special that we had here. A bunch of fireworks before the holidays properly pop off, and we will very soon be here on Christmas Eve with the next episode's discussion, which is going to be a double whammy. We are going to talk about both Quality of Mercy and Babylon 5 Squared, because this is going to be our last chance to get the schedule on track, so that Chrysalis, where Babylon 5 celebrates the New Year's Eve, is going to be falling right into place with our New Year's Eve between 2023 and 2024. This is our big goal for this year, what we want to end on a high note, and this is not going to be the last special of Babylon 5 Shadow Wars as well. We are going to have one more of these, highlighting one of the alien factions, before we blast off into the new year. Until then, you can find us, of course, here on YouTube, where you've probably seen this video, or on any social media platform, and basically anywhere you get podcasts at the Third Age Podcast. See you then.